start by saying that the rest of the sessions can benefit from reading or using this book. This is written by someone who writes about public health, published a lot about public health. And this is the second edition of the book. This has a lot of useful examples, both good and bad examples. And I recognize myself the mistakes that I made many years ago by reading this book and the examples therein. Yeah? It's the Chicago Guide to Writing About Multivariate Analysis, second edition. It's 2013, and you can buy it on Amazon or other online book retailers. Yeah. It also has a lot of supporting materials available online if you want to pursue further. This is highly recommended. So much so that, as you can see, I mark it. A lot of markings. All my students and my Indonesian collaborators, I highly recommend them to get a copy of this book for themselves. I read this more than 5 times already. I go back to this when I write the introduction. I go back to this when I write the results. I go back to this when I write the discussion. I go back to this when I interpret, describe tables. I go back to this when I specifically talk about multi-level model, when I talk about logistic regression, when I talk about survival analysis. I use this book a lot. She's not my friend, so I do not get any profit if you buy this book, but I'm pretty sure you will benefit from this if you get a copy of this book. Okay? So I'm going to pass this so you can flick through it as I talk. Yeah? Just flick through it. You don't read it. Yeah? Because we're going to continue with our topic. But the rest of the topic on questions, introductions, and discussion benefit from reading more of this book. Okay? Like I said, highly recommend it. I've read this more than 5 times, and I'm still using it as a handbook. Something that I use to hand when I write all the sections in my papers. Okay? So I'll let you flick through it and give it back to me. Okay? Yeah. It's £31. £31.30. I know it's expensive, and there is no excuse. Yeah. I think you must have 2 copies for your library. Not 1, but 2 copies for your library. Yeah? If you have any problems getting that, I'll talk to Pak Yoni or Pak Laksono. I'm sure they will agree that you must have at least 2 copies of that. Highly recommend it. Okay? Now, I did ask you to write down the topic that you are working on or you've been thinking to work on. Yeah? Can anyone write? Can anyone read what they've written? Just 1 or 2 of you. Read. Yes. Tommy.
Analysis of hospital preparedness to anticipate earthquake and tsunami hazard in Padang and Sumatera.
Good. Do you know why I like that particular topic? Can you read it again?
An analysis of hospital preparedness to to anticipate earthquake and tsunami hazard in Padang and Sumatra.
Yeah? What is particular about that is, it's obvious, it touches on a broad issue of disaster. We heard earlier that a topic is interesting if it's actual. It's one aspect of relevance, actual. Another example of actual issues now, for instance, is universal health coverage. Yeah? That's an actual ongoing topic. Yeah? Disaster is another one. So actual is a good criteria for a topic. It is also interesting because it's specific. Yeah? It's not about disaster or response to disaster in general, because government can respond to it, community can respond to it, individuals can respond to it, but hospital in particular can respond to it. Yeah? So it is specific, it is concrete, it is rooted, and that is a good criteria to think when you choose a topic. Remember earlier the questions that too many topics in a consultant report do not make a good scientific article. You pick on one or two topics that is specific, that is concrete. Okay? Yeah? Any other example? Yes?
Because of post-exposure human vaccination and factor contributing from eco-health perspective.
From eco-health. Yeah. Okay. We are always interested in costs in health system in developing countries. Yeah? And specific conditions. Yeah? We are always interested in specific, in concrete issues. Not broad, not too general. But in the introduction later, we will see how to make it relevant, yeah, for others. Okay? So those are examples where you want to think of writing one or two sentences, not more. One or two sentences for a topic, because you want to be able to answer quickly. What is it you're working on now? I'm working on hospital preparedness to anticipate tsunami disaster in Padang. And I believe it has relevance for all disaster-prone area. Yeah? You see that? It is specific and it reaches out to the anonymous reviewer. You see? It's not reaches out to the DFATs or those who gave you the terms of reference or the consulting body. No. Do you understand? We're talking about scientific articles here. Yeah? Okay? There's a difference. We want to be specific and we want to reach out to the international scientific community through the anonymous reviewers. To put it bluntly, you only need to satisfy 3 anonymous reviewers. It's not the whole world. Just 3 anonymous reviewers. So picture them in mind. That's what you need. Yeah? So now, if there is no more comments on this one, we move on to the next topic of formulating research questions. Is that alright? We know what we are going to work on. Yeah? Now we want to formulate research questions. Now, you may notice that I do not always have research questions in my paper. So why do you devote one section to talk about research questions? I do it because after talking, supervising, observing many Indonesians who are trained to become published scientists, it is easier for them if they formulate research questions. The way I put it is something like this. Research questions provide structure. When I was a reporter with Tempo magazine, and you may know that Gus Dur almarhum used to write for Tempo magazine. Ya, sering menulis kolom untuk Tempo. He used to write about football. Remember that? Yeah. He wrote flowingly, fluently. And not everybody can do that. The rest of us must have structure. Yeah? Not everybody can write in such a flowing manner. Yeah? Some of my papers are like that. But if I help other Indonesians to write like that, they find it difficult. It is a lot easier if I give them structure. Yeah? What does it mean? By the second page, they must have what research questions this paper is about, instead of just flowing into the literature review. Yeah? So that's the reason why some of my papers are not written this way, but I give this topic because, trust me, it helps you if you think of a paper with a very specific, with a very explicit research question. Okay? Yeah. Sometimes it is not spelled out as research questions. Sometimes it is just mentioned as research aims. Yeah. Sometimes it's mentioned as research goals. Sometimes it's mentioned as research objectives. They are roughly similar, presented in different ways, but they are the same set of animals. Okay? Yeah? And sometimes you will find an anonymous reviewer that is so picky and demand research questions when you give them already research aims. And do not argue, just reformulate it with a question mark. Okay? Do you understand? Yeah? So I focus on research question here. You can also see these as research aims. You can also see these as research goals and so on, or research objectives. I use the phrase research questions because it's quite commonly used as a research question. Now, it is also for the very simple reason that if you have a research questions, you are bound to ask yourself at the end of page 15 whether you have answered your own questions. Okay? Do you understand? If you write research objectives, you may forget to ask yourself on page 15 whether you have achieved your objectives. Do you understand? Do you understand? Research questions grabs you more. If you have a question mark on page 2 or page 3, yeah, then when you arrive at page 15 or page 20, you ask yourself, have I answered that question mark? Yeah? And if you haven't got a paper. Okay? Whereas if on page 2 you have research objectives or research goals or research aims, yeah, you may forget on page 15 or 20 whether you have achieved, whether you have met, whether you have attained your goals, your aims, your objectives. Do you understand? But if you put it as research questions with a question mark, at the end of it, you are disciplined, you are demanded, you are reminded to have answers. And if by page 15 or 20 you haven't got an answer, you haven't answered all your research questions, you have 2 research questions, you haven't got 2 answers, you have 3 research questions, you only have 2 research answers, then you haven't got a paper. Okay? So, it is very structured. It is very disciplined. And believe me, actually, writing research papers is easy because it has structure. It is not like writing cerpen, apalagi ceramah pendek seperti Pak Prof tadi. It's much harder. Do you understand? But research question has a structure. Ada langgamnya, kayak wayang. Permulanya kan dok 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 dok. Bumi gonjang ganjing, langit gondal gandu, gunungannya mesti turun, ya kan? First part, you must have research question, yeah. By the end of it, by the end of the paper, you must answer that. And if you haven't answered it, then you haven't got a paper, okay? Yeah. So we agree it helps to have research questions. We agree you can call it research aims, you can call it research objectives, but it's a lot more helpful if we call it research questions. Yeah? So how do we formulate research questions? Now that is a question, right? We agree it's good. Now, how do we formulate that? Yeah? We built on the topic earlier. Our topic must be specific. Our topic must be concrete. Our topic must be rooted in our location, in our research sites, and so on. Yeah? Let me give you an example of the papers that you must. You all have a copy of the papers, right? Although, like I said, I tend not to use research questions in my paper, but based on my experience working with Indonesians, I highly recommend people to use research questions. Here are some examples of how I can suggest you use research questions. You have a paper that I wrote with Subramanian and Kawaji on neighborhood social capital and individual health in Wales. Yeah? Health economics. And the second one is decentralization in Indonesia. This is with Asri Maharani, Devi Femina. That one is in health policy and planning. Yeah? Have that? Yeah? You have? Let's look at those two. Okay? And if you look at page 15 of the neighborhood social capital, the paragraph before method, yeah? So here's the aim, the objective or research questions, yeah? Like I said, I do not use the question mark here, but I use the aim, yeah? Or objectives or goals, yeah? Similar. This article represents the first attempt to measure the success of decentralization using financial indicators, focusing on the lessons to be learned from the failure of decentralization in Indonesia's healthcare system. Okay? So this is the aim of the studies, to measure the success of decentralization using financial indicators, hospital financial indicators, yeah? Now, what I want you to focus on here are two things. One, as I mentioned earlier, in relation to the topic, I want something in my aim or in my research questions that is specific, yeah? That is concrete. And I guarantee that by using financial indicators. Because success of decentralization can also be looked at by using satisfaction of patients. Yeah? No, I don't look at that. I look at this specific financial indicators. Yeah? Okay? So, in our aim, we have something specific. Yeah? And it's the same in the other paper. If you look at the neighborhood social capital, yeah, that page, the second page, yeah, you look at the paragraph above, yeah, you all got it? Yeah, and the sentence before that. So we wrote, finally, very few studies have examined the relationship between neighborhood social capital and self-rated health in the UK. Neighborhood social capital and self-rated health in Wales. Again, I want to emphasize that this is specific. Why? Because social capital can be neighborhood social capital or individual social capital. I'm not interested in individual social capital. I'm interested in neighborhood social capital. Health can be measured differently. Can be self-rated health, can be blood pressure, can be something else, like instrumental activities of daily living. Yeah? The point here is, by this point in the page, it must be specific. Yeah? I keep saying this because this is usually one of the main problems of an introduction section. One of the main problems of an introduction section is, at the end of the introduction section, we still do not know what is specific about this particular article. Do you understand? Have you seen that? Do you know? Yeah? Which brings me to my first point, or my second point. Do you remember earlier the topic? And the topic must be broad, must be relevant, must be interesting to people beyond Padang, beyond Indonesia. And yet, by now I said you have to be very specific, very concrete. Yeah? This is hard to put together, isn't it? Now the answer is this. All introduction has the shape of a torong. Let me repeat that. All introduction has the shape of general to specific. Torong. Torong minyak. All introduction has that shape. Starting from something general. Remember this morning I said the WHO reported the highest burden in the next 5 years comes from mental health. That's very general. And then we all go down to, at the end of the introduction, is Central for Epidemiological Study Depression Scale in Indonesia. You see that? Here is an example of that. Remember, mental disorders are becoming a major burden in developing countries. Very general, yeah? The first two words is mental disorders, yeah? And the last words are developing countries. Very general, yeah? Okay? And at the end of it, consumption poverty and mental illness using a common measure, namely 10-item Center for Epidemiological Studies Depression Scale. Is it specific? Mental disorders can be measured in more than one scale. Yeah? There is GHQ, CESD, WHO 20 scores, many alternatives. But I'm talking specifically about this. Yeah? This is the first aim, right? The second aim is something else. Okay? Do you see that? So, you must have, by the end of your first section, by the end of your introduction, something resembling a funnel, torong, from general to the very specific. Okay? Now we know the general shape. How do we get there? Yeah? How do we actually do that? We start from something that is broad to invite people outside, especially 3 anonymous reviewers, to share in our interests. Okay? By now, at this point, you are narrowing down to specific. Okay? Now this tells you one good inverse logic in research. And the inverse logic is this. Although we do our research in Padang or in Nusa Tenggara or in Indonesia in a specific place, but when we report it, we do not start from this, we start from something big. Yeah? In other words, scientific articles has very tiny relationship, has not a clear reflection of the process of research. Do you understand? Let me put it differently. Your process of research is from the specific to the general. But when you report it, it's the other way around. Do you understand? Yeah? Do you understand now? And so, if you write your report reflecting how you did your research, you fail. Let me repeat. If you write a scientific article like you write a report of doing your research, you fail. Yeah? Just look at the introduction. If you look at any of this introduction, by now you know this is not how I did the research. Not this way. It's something completely different. And so, if you write an article, a scientific article, as if you are reporting how you did your research, you fail. It's different. What's the difference? The difference is, in the first part, yeah, you start from something broad, something general, something relevant to you and to the external anonymous reviewers. But you quickly bring them to a very, very specific questions, aims, objectives. What does it mean by specific? It must be concrete, not mental disorders, but Center for Epidemiological Studies Depression Scale. Yeah? Not decentralization measures, but financial indicators.